You're listening to Sirva Soundbites, the official podcast of Sirva, a leading global relocation management and moving services company. Are you ready? Let's get started with today's episode, The Mobility Matrix, Strategic Workforce Planning.
Hi, and welcome to Sirva Soundbites, where we aim to connect, inform, educate, and entertain our listeners. I'm your host, Judee, the Director of Global Advisory Services at Sirva. And today we're diving into strategic workforce planning, why it matters in mobility, conversations, and what it entails, and why something every organization should be paying attention to in today's rapidly evolving business landscapes. So recently, Sirva published an article I wrote about strategic workforce planning, exploring key definitions and why it's critical for organizations. That conversation set the stage for today's discussion. And who we have today here is Sadhana Bhide, who's actually a subject matter expert for strategic workforce planning at Pearson. So Sadhana, I'd like to start off by, how do you define strategic workforce planning? And walk me through your career trajectory that kind of led you to this field.
Absolutely. So first of all, thanks so much, Judee, for inviting me to be on this podcast today. I'm really pleased to be here with Sirva. So how have I got to where I am today? My entire career has been as an HR business partner, working within organizations and developing and driving their people plans and strategy. I've focused a lot on strategic workforce planning and what that really means for the employee as well. Before I get into the detail of that, what led me to a career in HR? I actually started off with my studies in science. So I have my degrees in genetics. So the skills from genetics about analyzing data, building hypotheses and testing them, looking at results and making recommendations, critical thinking. They're all the things I carried through when I decided to make that move into HR. I've really worked across three main industries, primarily banking, then also broadcast media, and then for my grad program, I did a stint looking at global distribution. So that's got me to where I am today with my role at Pearson. What I do is work with organizations as they develop their SWP, their Strategic Workforce Planning strategy. So then to your first question, what is SWP? In a nutshell, we can say it's answering this question. What do I have in my workforce today? What do I need for my workforce of the future? Underneath that, there's a whole myriad of analyses, tools, recommendations, insights, and thinking that you would need to pull together to build that SWP plan.
It is very interesting that your background also is connected to the genetics from that science background and then the HR portion of your role, and then molding that into what does that look like from a strategic workforce planning. And so if we're looking at more of a strategic, but also from a workforce standpoint, what does that mean for the skills and behaviors that people generally need to fulfill whatever services or offerings that they have in the industry that they're working in?
Absolutely. I'll go to the personal for a second and think about myself. So I've talked a bit about
Yeah.
what are the skills I've built through the different stints of my career and my studies to get to where I am. A lot of those are transferable. And what I'd say is the technical HR knowledge that I have has developed and morphed and changed over time because the environments I've been in, they have changed as well. Whether it's different industries, different global locations, different business priorities, the element that changes is always a part that will change. What's constant and what is the foundation are those human-led skills, things like critical thinking, judgment, insight, analysis, being comfortable with data, communication, managing stakeholders. Bringing all of those together along with technical knowledge has enabled me to have some really great experiences in different parts of my career along the way. So if I think about myself as an example, how do you then roll that up to the macro level? If we are the CEOs of large global organizations, we're kind of asking the same questions. And I come back to that earlier point, which is what do I have in my workforce today? What do I need for my workforce of the future? Now, to answer that second half of the question, you need information around what's the business strategy going to be? What are my forecasts around consumer behavior? How do I bring in external factors like geopolitical changes, changes in the workforce, not just in terms of demographics and populations, but also what are they interested in? What do they want to do? How are they willing to work? And how do I bring all of that together as consideration factors to build that workforce of the future? And then the third element that you touched on around skills, I think we look at skills really in two parts. One is around technical knowledge that's needed to do that specific element of your job, the specific tasks that provide the output. It might need understanding technology, processes, systems, geographical requirements, whatever it is. The other part comes back to the human-centered skills and something we've looked at a lot around that skills outlook. Report that Pearson did recently identified the skills that are really in demand are things like communication, problem solving, leadership. And we could look at other things like dealing with ambiguity and uncertainty, for example, considering the world we're in today.
That's so interesting that you're blending both that, like you said, that human-centered skills of communication, problem solving, all of those different pieces, along with external changes that are constantly happening. One thing that we know that is for certain is that everything will change at one point or another, and so mentioning all of those changes and the technological shifts as an example, blending that with things that you mentioned like geopolitical, consumer impacts, and nurture. How do you nurture and building that into a strategic workforce for an organization? Like, where does that blend of human-centered, skill sets that we can only have, but also blending that into how to approach it on an external factor?
Absolutely. And honestly, that's the question that I see and hear and talk about with so many organizations as well. And let's not forget AI. It's the
Mm-hmm.
broadest element of technology, but of course, who can not be thinking about AI these days? And it's part of every organization strategy that I seem to be talking to at the moment. And again, I come back to your words, it's about the blend. Okay. And actually,
Mm.
you almost want to take that macro view to say, what what are the steps to achieve the work, whatever that work may be? It involves some human skills, some technical knowledge, and technology and AI. How do they come together to produce that output and that final piece of work as well? So again, I come back to how do organizations think about the skills they need? It comes back to the question of what do I want my business strategy to achieve? So,
Mm.
for example, is it things like I want to sell more of the stuff I make? It's saying it in a very basic way, or it could be I want to improve care of my customers. And that customer could be somebody going into a retail environment for shopping. It could be a patient being seen by medical teams. It could be manufacturing processes. How can they be made better? All these different examples. But ultimately, how can I make that experience better to improve the commercial success of my organization?
So it's interesting because I love this part about it because you're going in such like a 30,000 feet above the air kind of approach first to really identify how to then, you know, get more concise with strategic workforce planning because you want to know what is the purpose of your business, right? So what is that commercialization or the need of what your business is moving through? And so what I'd love to hear, and I kind of want to touch a little bit about AI because AI is a very interesting topic all on its own. And so, do you think that, like, with that 30,000 feet view of your business strategy and what those goals are, how does that now blend? And is AI an external factor, or is it a blend between human centered skills and the external factors? And how do you know, have that as an outline for your business strategy?
So 100% it's a blend. It's a blend and it's a blend that's here to stay as well. And we see organizations grappling with that concept at the moment. And the other thing I think I'd say is let's not forget that AI is new for everybody. It's the next wave
Hmm.
of technology and technology expansion as well. But we're all learning together in terms of what is it, how do I use it, and what does it actually mean for my organization? So I come back to that first question, what do I want my workforce to do? But in order to do that, I need to understand the business goals. In order to understand, once I've understood the business goals, I can then make decisions about the skills I need. So again, let's say, for example, the business goal is improved customer relationships. That would probably center a lot around the human skills you'd need around communication, engagement, decision making, problem solving, as an example. But actually, underpinning that, we should consider all of the processes that support that customer relationship, whether that's payment, processing queries, responding to questions, providing data. Those are all activities that could be automated. And thinking about examples, let's say the insurance industry, for example, nowadays, if you want to take out, say, home contents insurance, really you should be able to do this in 10 minutes, a few clicks, and it's done. If something happens to your home, a fire, a flood, or worse, you want somebody from that insurance company next to you at every step of the way whilst you go
Yeah.
through quite a shocking experience. So step one, you need human intervention. You need human related skills. Underpinning that, you need to be able to access all the details of your insurance, cover, policy,
Mm.
information, etc. as well. And that's really where the blend comes into play.
I think that's such a great example with home insurance. There are so many changes that are happening. And so one of the fun things that I actually recently read, it's a very interesting read, is that MIT actually recently had a research paper come out that said that 95% of the usage of AI in their workforce doesn't actually use AI to its full capacity. So, in that regard, how do you engage these employees? What kind of stakeholders are involved in here? And how do you make sure that it's all championing to push those kinds of evolution?
Absolutely. And the stat you cited, I've seen that theme come up time and time again recently as well. So, adoption of technology has always been an issue when it's new and it's being introduced, not just into the workplace, but into your lives. If we go back 20, 30 years or something, how did people book a holiday? How did you pay? What did you do if you got a paper check? How did you pay that check in? Now, for both of those examples, it's a technology led solution and approach first. It's quite rare that you'd need to involve a person or physically go to another physical site to action those two items as well. And that really comes back to something that Pearson looks at a lot, which is around learning, the concept of learning. So a couple of things to think about here in that we've looked at. The World Economic Forum put out some great research that said in the next 4 years, so by 2030, over 60% of the population will need upskilling and reskilling to be able to do the work that will be required in the future. Typically, people are spending 4 times as long in the workplace versus in an academic environment as well. And it comes back to that point, learning doesn't stop once you finish your studies, whatever level of study you're doing. It continues and even accelerates within the workplace. And the impact of adoption of AI has a number of points. One is looking at that learning to earn, that move from academia into the workplace and having to make sure you have that learning mindset and keep up that learning. Otherwise, you could be in situations such as the work is no longer viable for you to do. There could be location issues. There could be unemployment due to redundancy, displacement through new technologies, and so on and so on. Those two last points alone are costing the US an estimated $1.1 trillion annually. And that's equivalent to 5% of GDP. So we come back to that point, which you raise, how do I get the workforce ready? Because it's underprepared at the moment for the pace of learning that's needed to keep up with the pace of AI change and disruption. So then we come back to what's the responsibility of the organization? How do they approach this massive challenge? How do they approach also at the same time as an opportunity? Step one, let's look at the work. work's really being deconstructed into a series of tasks. So let's look at what are the actual tasks that people perform. And again, what are the tasks that people perform versus the tasks performed by technology? How do they come together? Looking at the work that people do means we then look at our talent allocation and distribution across industries. That is changing quite significantly. We talked about people-related skills, and the demand that there is for them at the moment, but how are they then being leveraged across different industries? We then look at careers. Every career will be impacted by technology and AI. So really, how do organizations make sure they invest in AI-related skills development? So it's that investment not just in the technology and bring it into the organization, but it's the skills that let people power that AI revolution, and that helps to support productivity and growth, and actually also innovation as well.
That's it. So this is such a, so first of all, this topic itself is such a great discussion around the learning component. You mentioned that there is a underpreparedness of our current society due to the pace of change that's happening. And whether we like it or not, it's already here and it's moving as quickly as it possibly can be. And it doesn't sound like it's going to get like any slower or it's going to stop or anything like that. There's not like a plateau of that pace
Yeah.
that's happening. And so you've touched on something really important where we're seeing about almost five generations in the workforce for the first time in history, right? You've got your baby boomers retiring, you've got your Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, and coming up, Gen Alpha is slowly entering. Funny enough, I actually was just with my nephew who's in his first year of university yesterday. And so he actually said to me, he's like, I believe that I'm going to keep learning. I like school, but I don't know if, once I'm done school, I'm going to stop learning. And that's his mentality. That was him just prompting me, without me prompting him about anything in terms of how he's doing with school or what he enjoys. And so one of the things that we did at Sirva last year at the WERC, which is a worldwide employee relocation conference, it's massive. We're going to be going to it, I believe, in Salt Lake City later this year. We did one last year in Washington where we kind of did a bit of speed dating through the generations. So it was actually really fun because a lot of the participants were learning about the different generations while being kind of proud of their own generation. So, for example, like I'm a millennial, so we were both raised in the analog and the digital. I could still read
Yeah.
like a typical clock, but I could also see what a digital, phone or a digital time looks like. And so making a bit of a neutral platform for generations to meet is a good way that it sounds like that's where some of the learning could occur. And so, when I started my career, jobs like ours didn't exist. I
Yeah,
couldn't have
agree.
said when I was as young as I was when my nephew was his age, oh yeah, I want to be a director of global advisory services when I grow up. And it's like I don't even think that that was a thing. And so what is work in this regard? So how do you make that transition from getting those blockages or kind of preventions or unpreparedness for that learning curve to define what is work?
Yeah, 100%. That is the question we're all asking at the moment. And I think just to add to your point there, it's not just disruption through AI and technology and a multi-generational workforce. Is it more about saying at an individual level, somebody may have a high level of proficiency and skills around the use of AI and AI adoption, but actually they may need more development in human-centered skills. That doesn't have to relate to any type of specific location, generation, experience, whatever. It's more about the individual. And I think it also comes back to that learning mindset. What's interesting what's of interest to the individual? What do they want to do? And I think for employers, that's why internal career mobility becomes that much more important, because the one thing that I hear that's a constant is that employees want to have a good career experience. And what
Mm,
it means is they want the opportunity to be challenged, to grow, to learn, to develop, to have success. through stretch assignments, through promotions, through projects, through the opportunity to change locations. But it comes back to they want to have a good career experience and they want to carry that experience to the next stage of their career, whether that's in the same organization or to another organization and then coming back as an alumni or something like that.
Yeah, I think this is kind of redefining that older, saying, "Are you living to work or are you working to live?" Right? And so it's kind of made those two descriptions or definitions of how to live or work kind of a bit more blended now. They want to make sure that their
Yes.
lifestyle is reflective of their work. And so, if we're going to do that and understand the changes with technology, all of the external factors, the generation changes and the shifts, how do you start embedding that into strategic workforce planning, and what kind of investments, what kind of ROI and buy-in are you recommending for tools and resources for any organizations to start leveraging?
Absolutely. So, in terms of tools and things to consider as well, I think the greatest value is to start off by understanding that same question, what do I have in my workforce today? What's the level of skills proficiency across the organization? If we think about tools, what tools are available to help me understand my workforce? There are many and there are plentiful options around. What do I do with that data? Do I use it to do things like build a skills framework within my organization? On the other side, I then look at my talent strategy. So my talent strategy could start off with looking at things like internal career mobility. How do I identify where I've got skills, knowledge, and experience? I move people around the organization to manage different pieces of work through projects. When we do think, when we implement strategies that look at enhancing the employee career experience, let's think about what that ROI could be. From a macro organization level, I would expect to see an uptick in productivity, perhaps better, smoother operating procedures, and an impact on operating costs, an uptick in commercials as well if productivity is improved. If the experience that the consumer has with the organization is better, faster, smoother, easier, a more enhanced relationship experience, we would expect to be more success for the organization in terms of more people would be demanding their services and or products as well. On the other side, we then look at the employee experience. So from an ROI perspective, I would expect to see an uptick in loyalty and the employee value as well that they see. Would they recommend them as an employer of choice? I suspect there would be an impact on things like attrition and voluntary resignation. And I would expect to see more engagement with the organization.
So can I pick on a little bit of that engagement piece? Because
Yes.
I love that part about the engagement portion, because that will tie into your retention and longevity of the employee's tenure. So understanding the engagement pieces, I would have to say, how do you constantly keep motivating employees to want to learn, right? That does tie into your business goals, which is essentially a strategic workforce planning. And what are the evolutions and steps that are foundational versus agile?
Absolutely, absolutely. If we think about foundational, what does that mean for organizations? I think in today's world, it's looking at things like a learning mindset, creating and developing a culture of learning within the organization. Now, at a real practical level, it's about giving the employee time to learn,
Mm,
time to learn, and after that, time to embed that learning into the work that the employee does, because that's the real way the individual sees the results and the success of the effort from their learning. And I think having a foundation where there's a learning environment and a learning culture and an infrastructure where people can access learning content easily at a time that works for them, and they can then apply that learning into their day-to-day jobs, means that you automatically improve the skills proficiency levels within the organization. When we then look at what's agile, if we think about the last sort of 5, 10 years, the level of change we've seen around the world that has been unplanned and unforecasted has been massive. I hear the phrase we are living through unprecedented change, or a lot of the time. So,
So like it's everything unprecedented is precedented at this point now.
absolutely, absolutely. And they say change is the only constant, and I really feel it is.
Exactly.
So, how do organizations manage, and not just manage, how do they thrive in such a volatile and ambiguous environment? It's making sure the organization is ready to pivot and respond to change. So, from an agile
Hmm.
perspective, how can I be ready to pivot as an organization? It starts with knowing what do I know about my workforce right here, right now, in terms of the skills and abilities and experiences that they have across the entire organization. So I can reassign work as I need to and really have that agile approach. An easy and simple way to assess people from a skills and proficiency level as well, and an easy way for individuals to be able to talk about the skills and knowledge and experience that they have. And that could be things such as embedding a credentialing program after putting in a learning structure as well. It could be by bringing back that learning culture and mindset so people have got time to learn. But if the infrastructure is set up, then the ability to pivot is that much easier.
That's it is interesting to make sure what I'm hearing from you, and correct me if I'm wrong, is
Mm,
the way that change has to happen is it has to be simple, it has to be um, efficient, but it also has to be intentional based on where some things are. So, for example, if we're going to be expecting employees to, have 8 hours working day, like back in the day, and then you can't go home and you can't make dinner and all of these things. So even just like tiny little intentional changes like that is key to ensure that people are comfortable and now are, getting more acquainted, I would say, with technology and seeing the benefits of it. And so, one of the things that I have kind of learned my way is, my parents, for example, would call me and ask me, how do I book travel? And how do I do this? And me and your dad want to go to this country and here's our budget. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this would take me probably at least a 45-minute phone call. And so I set them up with ChatGPT. So now my mom talks to ChatGPT more than she talks to me, I would say. Um, she still calls me to make sure that I'm
good,
eating well, but
good.
she's, she's no longer calling me to ask me how do I book this or what kind of places do I look for, and it'll give her links directly. And so these are kind of those tiny little changes where it's in everyday's people's lives for them to see how do you then take those kinds of examples and translate it into work.
Absolutely. And it can often start with a very small example like a microwave or an introduction to ChatGTP, Copilot, or whatever that AI platform is as well. And it's taking that concept of starting with one and rolling it up to many as well. I think what I see and hear from organizations is employees need the time and the freedom and the space in a structured, safe way to honestly play with the technology that's available to them in the world of their job as well, and see what it can do to make a difference to their day-to-day operating processes and procedures. So that's step one. Step two is then innovation. I understand how to use this to support my day to day. How can I then apply AI to change my work or the way I do things to achieve a business goal, to do something differently, to introduce a new product or service as well? And again, that comes through confidence and familiarity with the tools that are available to people.
And with all of those changes and making sure that it's intentional,
Mm,
how can strategic workforce planning work more closely? For example, let's take, we're talking about mobility and we're talking about HR, and workforce planning is kind of a huge, not a kind of, but it is a huge chunk of
mm.
HR and in itself. So, how does strategic workforce planning then closely align to mobility, whether it's internal mobility, it's talent mobility, it's global mobility that we work in this industry, and make them more strategic assets?
Absolutely. So if we think about that basic question again, what do I have in my workforce today? what do I need for my workforce tomorrow? Identifying the gap between the due points in time and the bridge to get from start to tomorrow will usually pull out a number of HR related actions. And they could be things like building the workforce. Then you want to look at things like applying a learning program. It could be bringing in a new workforce from outside. And again, I would caveat say, if I bring in a workforce, that workforce could be implementation of new technologies and AI. It could be implementation of new people. It will be a blend of the two as well. So there are various other HR related outputs and actions that come into play that bring the strategic workforce plan to life and achieve the goals that the plan set out to do. So I go back to keep checking in on the plan. If the plan is improve skills experience by 25% in 2 years, for example, okay, step one is let me do a skills audit. Let me look at building a skills framework so people can see an individual career path that they can progress through to improve their knowledge, experience, and proficiency. And then step three is then saying, once I have this highly skilled workforce, what do I do with it? Do I keep them sat in the same jobs doing the same thing and not give them the chance to apply those skills? Or do I then come back and think about mobility and say, okay, with this enhanced, improved level of skill, capability, I can move them around the organization, whether that's physically with a location change or virtually, I suppose, in terms of just changing teams or functions as well, but deploying and applying those skills, knowledge, and experiences that they've learned along the way to a different technical environment. And that brings me back to my other point of saying your foundation knowledge of skills are the things that will carry you through from job to job, and they tend to be more around the human-centered skills. Technical skills will morph and change as you yourself change jobs.
That's very, very accurate. I think there's definitely like in terms of your human skills and your technical skills are starting to blend through. One of the things that you mentioned is very interesting because it doesn't matter whether it's external hires or your internal development of your employees, but you also tapped into technological advancements and determining whether it's the right tool or how do you implement. Is it kind of similar to when you have a new employee and you're onboarding them into your company?
Mhm.
Is that the same way that you would think about how, when you have new tools, how do you implement them and onboard them into your workforce, right? So it's like
Yeah,
you're doing,
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah,
for technology.
absolutely. Absolutely. I always say, think about your technology as another member of your team. They need to
Hmm.
go through being onboarded, and then other people need to look at what they bring to the team as an output, skills, knowledge, and experience.
Yeah, it's that those are really great examples, and I think, interesting analogies, and I think that does speak
Yeah,
wider to everybody because everybody knows how you onboard into a company. Everyone knows that there's things that you have to meet, there's people you need to know, there's processes you need to know. So if that's the case, how, like, why not do it for technological tools or even
absolutely.
educational tools and so forth? Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because normally you find implementation of technology comes with a pretty hefty strategic investment cost. So actually, let's
Mm,
make sure it's not just everything switched on day one and it's working.
no.
That's an achievement in itself, but actually, that's when the real work starts. What do I do with that technology? The intention, to your point, the intention is that it achieves certain deliverables, whether it's cost saving, faster processes for ops and productivity, um, adding enhanced outputs, perhaps a higher level of data analysis in a shorter amount of time that people can then take away and use as they need to.
For sure. And considering that what we took away today, and I think for me the biggest takeaway that this conversation has is change is constant, whether we like it or not. Like
Absolutely. Absolutely.
that's never going to stop. That's never going to change. What I'm hearing from you is that strategic workforce planning allows all that change and data to be honed in to support the business, but also ensure that there's an intentional inclusion to how employees are also going to receive that.
Absolutely, and also how are employees evolving and changing at the same time? As they become more
Mm,
familiar with technology through adoption, it will change the way they work as well and the jobs they do, and how that then marries to achieve that overall business objective. And I think for any sort of lead of SWP or head of HR or whatever the role title is, when they are advocating using a strategic workforce plan to achieve their business goals, every check-in they do after go live needs to come back to that question and say, am I still answering that question? So if we think about that same example you gave around I onboard people, actually, how do I onboard talent?
how you onboard employees is similar
Yeah,
to how we should think about onboarding technology.
because actually there would have been significant strategic investment, time, and effort into getting the okay to go ahead and actually bring that technology into your organization.
Mm,
Once that technology is live and active in your organization, that's not the end of the work. That's actually the beginning of the work. And that work is a journey of looking not only at how do I embed the technology, but how do I use it in my day to day? How do I use it perhaps to see disruption in my day to day as well and identify new and different ways of working? Or how do I use it to add new tasks and experiences and activity as part of my job? So you're not just staying stable and floating calmly across the sea. You're powering ahead in the speedboat and you're adding new things as you go through as well.
yeah. Looks like CHROs of the world right now are probably going to change a little bit of their job titles from chief human resources to chief human resources and change or innovation. So yeah,
I think it's a trend that started and is coming. I'm aware of one organization where they have actually blended those two roles into one. So chief
nice.
people officer and chief IT officer as well. And the argument is as we've been saying, it's saying the two elements of resource, people and technology, are so closely intertwined and linked. We can't not have them under the same remit.
Well, this has been such an enlightening conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing all of your knowledge with us. But before I let you go, we'd like to share a top tip. What do you have for our listeners?
So when it comes to strategic workforce planning, my top tip is get started. Find an area within your organization and run a pilot. Share the results of those pilots and then move on to the next area to run another pilot or incorporate the original area and then grow the level of the organization that's involved from an SWP plan. Underpinning that, what should you do in the pilot? I think go back and ask yourself the question, do I know what skills, knowledge, and experience I have in my organization today? And if you can't answer with a yes to that question, then you know you need to run a basic data analysis report to understand what you have today before you can build for tomorrow.
Right. So, bottom line is don't try to boil the ocean, but try to
Agree.
understand what's even in the ocean in the first place.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Great. Well, that was brilliant. Thank you, Sadhana. It was a pleasure to have you on our show. Once again, thank you for listening to Service Sound Bites. If you enjoy our show, please click and subscribe and share, and be sure to come back for next time. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop us a note at soundbites@sirva.com. Until then, this is Judee and Sadhana, and don't forget, Sirva provides everything you need to move talent and deliver experience. See you next time.